the family dinner where my sister-in-law announced her newest crisis. A medical emergency requiring $12,000 by Friday tears, streaming the whole table already reaching for their checkbooks. I set a notebook down in the middle of the table and said, before anyone writes a check, I want to read you something. It's a list. Every emergency Danielle has had in the last 5 years, with dates and dollar amounts. I've been keeping it. And I think once you hear it all in one place, you'll understand why I stopped believing in Friday. The table went quiet. Danielle's tears stopped, just for a second, a flicker, a recalculation, and in that flicker, everyone who was paying attention saw it. Let me back up. Because to understand why I spent 2 years quietly keeping a ledger of my sister-in-law's tragedies, you have to understand how she operated, and how good she was, and how long it took me to let myself believe what I was seeing. Because believing it meant accepting that someone I'd welcomed into my family had been robbing us one heartbreak at a time. And smiling at Christmas the whole while. My name is Priya and I'm 40 years old, and my sister-in-law spent 5 years extracting money from my family through a rotating series of fabricated emergencies, exploiting the one thing decent families can't defend against, their own compassion. This is the story of how she did it, why no one could stop her, and what it took to finally lay the whole pattern on the table where everyone could see it at once. Let me tell you about Danielle. Danielle married my brother Rohan 7 years ago. And I want to say clearly because it matters that at first I liked her. We all did. She was warm, funny, attentive. She remembered your birthday, asked about your life, made you feel seen. She folded into our family beautifully, and I was genuinely glad my brother had found her. That's the thing about people like Danielle, the thing you have to understand. They are not obviously predators. They're charming and kind-seeming, and they make you love them, because being loved is the mechanism. You cannot extract money from people who don't care about you. Danielle's warmth wasn't separate from her scheme. It was the scheme's foundation. The emergencies started small, and about 2 years into her marriage to Rohan. The first one was a car. Her car had broken down. She needed it for work. She was so embarrassed to ask. She'd pay it back the moment she could. $2,000. And of course we helped. That's what family does, and $2,000 to help your brother's struggling wife keep her job is nothing, is an easy yes, is the kind of help that makes you feel good about your family. She never paid it back. But she never asked in a way that made the non-repayment noticeable. Either, that was part of the craft. The $2,000 just quietly dissolved into the general goodwill of family, unmentioned, and a few months later there was a new emergency, unrelated, urgent, heartbreaking, and we helped again. Because why would we connect a car repair to a medical bill to a rent shortfall? Each emergency was its own isolated tragedy. That was the genius of it. She never let the emergencies form a pattern in anyone's mind, because each one arrived fresh, standalone, wrapped in its own specific tears. Let me give you the catalog, because the catalog is the crime, and it took me 2 years to assemble it. There was the car. Then a medical bill, a scary one, a lump tests she couldn't afford, and we all rallied around her in terror for her health. Gave, and the lump turned out to be nothing, thank God, and no one ever saw a medical record because who asks a frightened woman for her medical records? There was a rent shortfall when Rohan was between jobs, entirely plausible, entirely urgent. There was a family emergency back in her hometown, a sick parent, a funeral, travel she couldn't afford. There was a legal problem, vaguely described, requiring a retainer. There was a work crisis, an investment that went bad, a deposit she'd lose without immediate cash. For a few months, for years, a new catastrophe, each one urgent, each one requiring money by a specific near deadline. Always Friday. Always some looming date designed to short-circuit deliberation and trigger immediate giving. And we gave. For 5 years, my family, my parents, me, various aunts and uncles, all of us, gave Danielle, cumulatively, an amount I would eventually calculate at over $60,000. $60,000, extracted in pieces, none of them individually large enough to trigger alarm, all of them wrapped in a specific fresh tragedy, all of them urgent, all of them heartbreaking, all of them, I would come to understand, fabricated. Here is the subplot that first cracked my certainty, because I didn't figure it out alone. I figured it out because of a woman named Carol. Carol was Danielle's friend, from before she married Rohan, someone who drifted at the edges of family events. And at a wedding, a couple of years into the pattern, Carol and I ended up at the same table, a little drunk, talking the way you do with a near stranger at a wedding. And Carol said something that lodged in me like a splinter. She said, laughing a little bitterly, "You Sens are so generous. Danielle's lucky. Her old friend group cut her off years ago. She'd hit everyone up for one emergency after another until nobody had anything left to give. Guess she found greener pastures." I laughed it off in the moment, but I didn't forget it. Danielle's old friend group had cut her off, after a series of emergencies, until no one had anything left to give. The exact thing she was doing to us. She'd done it before to another group of people, and drained them dry and moved on. That was the splinter. And once it was in me, I couldn't get it out, and I started, reluctantly, guiltily, feeling like a monster the whole time, to pay attention. Because here is the thing I have to be honest about, the second subplot, the one inside me. I didn't want to believe it. For a long time after Carol's comment, I actively resisted the knowledge, because believing it made me a bad person, or so it felt. What kind of sister-in-law suspects a woman of faking her own mental scare? What kind of person hears, "I have a lump," and thinks, "Prove it"? The suspicion felt like the crime. Danielle had built her scheme inside the one place decent people won't look. She'd wrapped her lies in the exact tragedies that make suspicion feel monstrous. Who audits a grieving woman? Who fact-checks a funeral? Compassion that made us give was the same compassion that made us unable to suspect, and Danielle knew it, and she chose her emergencies precisely for their uncheckability. So for a while, I did nothing but notice. And what I noticed, once I let myself, was damning. The emergencies followed a rhythm, every few months, like clockwork, calibrated to how long the goodwill from the last one lasted. The deadlines were always urgent, always designed to prevent deliberation. The details were always just vague enough to be unverifiable. A medical scare with no named doctor, a legal problem with no named lawyer, a hometown emergency in a hometown none of us had ever visited. And the money never came back, ever, not once in 5 years, though repayment was always promised and the promise was never mentioned again. And so, feeling like a traitor, I started writing them down. Just a notebook. Dates, amounts, the stated emergency, whether it was ever verified, never. Whether it was ever repaid, never. I told myself I was probably wrong, that I'd look back at this list and be ashamed of my own suspicion. But I kept it. For 2 years, every time a new emergency arrived and the family reached for its checkbooks, I quietly added a line. And the list, assembled, was undeniable in a way that no single emergency could ever be. That was the whole point. The thing I understood as the notebook filled. Danielle's scheme survived on isolation. Each emergency, alone, was believable and sympathetic. The pattern assembled was obviously a con. It protected herself by making sure no one ever saw the emergencies side by side, by making each one a fresh, standalone tragedy that no decent person would connect to the others. The notebook did the one thing her whole method was designed to prevent. It put the emergencies in a single place, on a single page, where the rhythm and the unverifiability and the never-paid pattern became impossible to explain as anything but a con. Let me tell you about the midpoint, the moment I nearly threw the notebook away, because I want to be honest about how close Danielle came to getting away with it forever. About 18 months into my letter, Danielle had an emergency that nearly broke my resolve, because this one seemed, finally, real. Rohan, my own brother, was genuinely struggling. I could see it. It wasn't Danielle's performance, it was my brother's actual stress. And Danielle framed an emergency around it, a real seeming crisis touching my actual brother's actual difficulties. And I looked at my notebook full of suspicion and felt like the cruelest person alive. What if I was wrong? What if, in my suspicion, I let a real emergency touching my own brother go unhelped? What if the notebook had made me a monster who'd let her family suffer to protect a theory? I nearly burned the notebook that night. I nearly decided that even if Danielle had faked some of them, the cost of suspecting a real one was too high, that it was better to be robbed than to be the person who refused a genuinely drowning family member. And then I did the one thing that saved me. I checked. Just this once, quietly, carefully, I verified one detail of the emergency, one specific checkable claim Danielle had made about the crisis, and it was false. Not vague, not ambiguous, provably, specifically false. She had built this real emergency, the one designed to touch my brother's genuine struggle, on a specific lie I could disprove. And in disproving it, I understood that she'd anticipated my growing doubt and constructed an emergency precisely to exploit it, to use my own guilt about suspecting her as a weapon to make me stop. She was that good. She turned my conscience into a tool against me. That was the moment my guilt died and my resolve became total. I wasn't a monster for suspecting her. I'd been a mark for not suspecting her sooner, and I was done being a mark, so I finished the work. I completed the letter, 2 years and dozens of emergencies deep. And I did the thing I'd been avoiding for months, the thing that turned my private letter into an undeniable case. I went back to Carol's offhand comment at the wedding, and I found Danielle's old friend group, and I actually spoke to them. It took some doing. Carol gave me a name, a woman named Meredith, who'd been close to Danielle years before, in the life she'd had before she married my brother. And I called Meredith, feeling like a private investigator, feeling absurd, half expecting her to tell me I was paranoid and cruel. Instead, when I explained who I was and why I was calling, there was a long silence on the phone, and then Meredith exhaled and said, Oh, she's doing it to a whole family now. I always wondered where she'd go. And Meredith told me everything, and it was like listening to a recording of my own last 5 years. There were 6 of us, Meredith said, a friend group close from our 20s. And Danielle was the heart of it, honestly warm, funny, the one who remembered everything, the one who made you feel special. We loved her, and then the emergencies started. She laughed, a tired laugh, a car. Then a medical thing, a scare, a lump no doctor should name, and then it was suddenly fine. Then a family funeral back home, then a legal problem. For a few months, something new, something urgent, always needing money by some specific day, always so heartbreaking you'd feel like a monster for hesitating. We gave and gave. And she never paid a cent back, but she never asked in a way that made you notice, so it just dissolved. I was gripping the phone so hard my hand ached. It was my letter. It was every line of my letter, lived by 6 strangers years before my family ever met her. How long? I asked. 4 years, Meredith said. It took us 4 years to figure it out, because each one was its own separate tragedy, and who connects a car repair to a funeral to a lump? We only figured it out because 2 of us finally compared notes at a party. Just happened to mention the time I helped Danielle with her emergency, and realized we'd each helped with a completely different one, and then a third person chimed in. And suddenly we were standing in a kitchen realizing we'd each been giving her money for years, and none of us had known about the others. That's when it fell apart. The second we compared notes, it was obvious. We cut her off. She cried, she said we turned on a vulnerable woman, she made a few people feel guilty, and then she vanished. And I always thought someone's next. Some poor kind person is next. Meredith paused. I'm sorry it was your family, but I'm glad you called. I'm glad someone finally started writing it down before it took 4 years. I asked Meredith the question that mattered most. In 4 years, was even one of the emergencies real? Even one? Not one that we could ever verify, she said. Not one she ever repaid. Not one with a name or a document attached. 4 years, and I couldn't point to a single one and say that one was true. That's what I keep coming back to, not that she lied sometimes, that I can't find a single time she told the truth. I thanked Meredith, and I hung up, and I sat in my kitchen for a long time. Because I'd had a suspicion, and a letter, and now I had something more. An independent witness, a whole prior family drained by the identical scheme, a woman who'd lived my exact 5 years and confirmed every mechanism of it. Danielle wasn't a struggling relative who sometimes overstayed her needs. She was a serial operator, a person who moved through life finding compassionate people and bleeding them dry, one fabricated tragedy at a time, who had done it before to 6 people, for 4 years, until they compared notes in a kitchen and the whole thing collapsed. And the detail that chilled me most was how they'd finally caught her. Not through cleverness, not through a letter, but by accident, 2 people happening to compare notes at a party. It had taken a random collision for the truth to surface, because Danielle's entire method was built on preventing exactly that comparison. My family, we were the greener pastures, we were the next group to be drained. And I wasn't going to leave our rescue to a chance conversation at a party. I was going to force the comparison, put every emergency in one place, in front of everyone on purpose. And I made a decision about how to end it, because I'd learned from every one of these situations that a con like Danielle's cannot be broken in private. If I went to the family quietly, one by one, Danielle would do what she'd always done, isolate, reframe, turn on the tears, make me the villain suspecting a vulnerable woman. Her whole power was in keeping the emergencies separate and the family divided. The only way to break it was to put the entire pattern in front of the entire family at once, in a single room, where the ledger could speak for itself, and Danielle couldn't pick us off one at a time. She gave me the room herself, with her newest emergency. Let me tell you about that dinner. Family dinner, and Danielle arrived with her latest catastrophe, a medical emergency, $12,000 needed by Friday, the biggest ask yet, delivered with the full performance. The tears, the trembling, the terror, the specific looming deadline. And I watched my family, my good and generous family, begin to reach for their checkbooks, already moved, already giving exactly as they had for 5 years. And I set my notebook on the table. Before anyone writes a check, I said, I want to read you something. It's a list. Every emergency Danielle has had in the last 5 years, with dates and dollar amounts. I've been keeping it for 2 years, and I think once you hear it all in one place, you'll understand why I stopped believing in Friday. Danielle's tears stopped for just a second, that flicker, that recalculation, and then resumed, and she said, wounded, Priya, what are you doing? I'm sick. But I was already reading. March, 4 years ago, car repair, $2,000, never repaid, never mentioned again. That August, a metal scare, a lump, tests, $5,000, no doctor ever named, the lump was nothing, no record ever seen, never repaid. That December, rent shortfall, $3,000. The following spring, a family funeral in a hometown none of us have ever visited, $4,000 for travel. That summer, a legal retainer for a problem never specified, $6,000, no lawyer ever named. That fall, a bad investment, a deposit about to be lost, $5,000. I kept going, line after line, 2 years of the ledger and the years before it reconstructed from memory and old texts. In total, over 5 years. This family has given Danielle over $60,000 across roughly a dozen emergencies, not one of which was ever verified, not one of which was ever repaid, each one arriving every few months like clockwork, each one urgent. Each one wrapped in a fresh tragedy, so none of us would ever connect it to the last. The room was silent. My family was staring at the list, and I could see it happening on their faces. The same thing that had happened to me, the isolated tragedies suddenly assembling into a pattern, the pattern suddenly obviously a con. And here's the part that made me certain, I said. Danielle's old friend group, from before she married Rohan, they cut her off years ago, for exactly this. A rotating series of emergencies until no one had anything left to give. I spoke to one of them. It's the same pattern, the same emergencies, the same never paid. She did it to them until they were dry, and then she found us. We're the greener pastures, everyone. We're just the next group she's draining. Danielle went for her weapons, the tears, the wound, the reframe. I can't believe you'd do this to me. I'm sick, Priya. I'm sitting here sick and scared, and you've been spying on me, keeping some cruel list, turning my own family against me. And for a moment, the old machine engaged, I saw a couple of relatives waver, saw the pull of her performance. Because she was very good and the tears were very convincing. And then my brother spoke. Rohan, her husband, who had been silent, staring at the list, his face doing something complicated. And Rohan said quietly, the metal scare 4 years ago, the lump. He looked at his wife. You told me that never happened, Danielle. When I asked you about it later, worried, you told me you'd exaggerated a normal checkup because you were stressed about money. You told me. So which is it? Was it real and you lied to me about it being nothing? Or was it fake and you took $5,000 from my parents for a lump that never existed? His voice cracked. I've been defending you for 5 years, and I just realized I don't actually know which of these were real. I don't know if any of them were real. Do you? Can you tell me right now in front of everyone one emergency on that list that actually happened the way you said? And Danielle couldn't. That was the end of it. Faced with the ledger and the other friend group, and her own husband asking her to name one true emergency, she couldn't produce a single verifiable, repaid, real one, because there weren't any. The silence where her answer should have been was the confession. Here is how it ended. The family, once the pattern was undeniable and Rohan himself had turned, could not unsee it. The tears stopped working, because tears only work when they're isolated from the pattern, and the pattern was now lying on the dinner table in my handwriting. Danielle's 5-year con collapsed in a single evening, the way these things do once the isolation breaks, and everyone finally compares notes. The money was mostly gone, of course, spent, over 5 years, on whatever Danielle actually spent it on, which was never the emergencies. There was talk of pursuing it, and where the fabrications were proval, there was genuine legal exposure, because obtaining money through repeated fabricated pretenses is fraud. But the family's real reckoning wasn't about the $60,000. It was about the betrayal. The fact that someone they'd loved, welcomed, worried over, and grieved with had been performing all of it, weaponizing their compassion, treating their love as an ATM. Rohan's marriage did not survive it, and I won't pretend that wasn't the hardest part. Because it was my brother's heart breaking in real time at that dinner table, realizing that the woman he'd built a life with had been conning his family for their entire marriage and had lied to his face about it. He left her. It was awful, and it was necessary, and he's slowly rebuilding. And he's told me more than once that he's grateful I kept the list even though it detonated his life. Because the alternative was a lifetime married to Khan, and finding out at 50 instead of 42. Danielle did what people like her do. She cast herself as the victim, told anyone who'd listened that the family had turned on a sick, vulnerable woman, that I was a jealous sister-in-law who'd fabricated a cruel campaign against her. A few distant people believed her, for a while. But the ledger was real, and the other friend group was real, and her own inability to name one true emergency was real, and the story didn't survive contact with the facts. She drifted out of our lives to find, I have no doubt, greener pastures somewhere else. A new family, a new group, a new set of compassionate people who haven't yet learned to write things down. Carol, the wedding table friend whose bitter joke had planted the splinter, I sought out afterward to thank. She'd handed me the first thread without even knowing it. I always felt bad for whoever was next, she said. I'm glad it was someone who noticed. So am I. 5 years, my sister-in-law extracted $60,000 from my family through a rotating series of fabricated emergencies, exploiting the one thing good families can't defend against, their own compassion. Her whole method depended on isolation. Each emergency, alone, was believable and sympathetic. No decent person audits a grieving woman or fact-checks a medical scare, and she chose her tragedies precisely for their uncheckability, and made sure no one ever saw them side by side, because side by side, the con was obvious. So I did the one thing her scheme couldn't survive. I wrote them down. Every emergency, every date, every dollar in one place, on one page, the exact thing she'd spent 5 years making sure no one would ever assemble. She was a genius at making each tragedy stand alone. She never once considered that someone might be quietly building the list that would make them all stand together. I stopped believing in Friday. And then I made sure my whole family stopped believing in it too, all at once, in one room, with a notebook that finally let a family's compassion be protected by its memory. Compassion is a beautiful thing. It's also the easiest thing in the world to rob, if the person robbing you is patient and charming and careful never to let you see the pattern. The defense isn't to stop being compassionate. The defense is to remember, to write it down. Keep, even against your own guilt, the letter that lets love see clearly. I kept the letter. It turned out to be the most loving thing I ever did for my family, because it let us stay generous people who could no longer be robbed for being generous.